Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about the Ruy Lopez, beginning after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5 begins the Ruy Lopez, and more specifically we're going to be talking about the bird defense beginning with knight d4 and how we're supposed to meet this with the white pieces. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on that notification icon. So what is this move knight d4 trying to do? Well, in short, it's trying to equalize by exchanging some pieces. That's basically what black is trying to do. It works in other openings and in other situations. For example, if we were to transpose into the four knights, say via the Berlin, like knight f6, knight c3, you can play this same idea, this knight d4, this is called the Rubinstein defense, and this is well known to completely equalize. But part of that has to do with after the move knight takes d4, e takes d4, you're actually hitting this knight on c3, and the best move according to theory is to counterattack with the move e5. So we have these two moves inserted, this knight c3 and knight f6. And after e5 takes on c3, takes on f6, queen f6 should be completely equal for black. The position has been completely simplified, nobody has pawns in the middle of the board, and there's no way to take advantage of black's very slight lack of development, white's very slight development lead. There's really no way to take advantage of it. So the bird defense is a little bit different. When you play knight to d4 after this exchange, you are kind of hindering white's development. You're trying to prevent knight c3. You're trying to prevent quick development. But white is already up a tempo, and he's about to be up 2. As soon as he castles, he's going to have his king safe. He's going to have a piece out. Now, black is hoping to play c6 and d5 and strike back in the middle before white gets a chance to become even more active, and he's hoping to equalize in the center of the board with this maneuver. But in reality, when you're up 2 tempo in the middle of the board, you should have some sort of advantage. So this position should be slight edge white. It should be slight edge white of some kind. Now, the one advantage of this version of the bird defense for black is at least it's sound. There's actually another version of the bird defense that isn't sound at all. For example, if you play a6 and b5 first, the so-called wing variation, and then throw your knight on d4, you're completely lost after knight takes d4, e takes d4, because white has this tactic. Now, as you can see here, I've highlighted c5, c4. This is kind of black's idea. You extend your pawns, and you're kind of threatening to trap this bishop on b3. So it looks kind of scary at first, but the reality is white should be completely winning. So pause the video, see if you can find it. The correct move is bishop takes f7 check, king f7, queen h5 check, and then after g6 you would have queen d5, forking king and rook. After the king moves, you simply take the rook, and your position is completely winning. So this version of the bird defense, or this attempt to play knight d4 to simplify the position and get pieces off the board, is completely unsound. So we can't do it with a6 and b5. It would certainly be better to do it if we inserted the moves, say knight f6 and knight c3, if we turn it into a 4 knights, into a Rubinstein variation. But it is sound to play the move knight d4, and we do have to face this with white, and we need to know how to meet it. But basically, we should just play knight takes d4, e takes d4, and castles. And we're just enjoying being up 2 tempos. So now, black needs to strike in the middle kind of as quickly as possible. He needs to play c6, and then after bishop to c4, he needs to kind of play either d5, or he needs to develop quickly with knight f6. Now, moves other than striking in the middle with either d5 or knight f6 seems to give white more than enough time to consolidate. Like if, for example, let's say we try a5, again, to trap the bishop, a4, and then say knight f6, we can just simply play d3. And these extra tempos are simply helping white. Nothing bad is happening. So after now d5 takes, and then say knight takes, we would have rook e1 check. And the slight little bit of space extra that black has is not remotely worth all the trouble that he's going to have because white is up several tempo. So for example, bishop e6, queen h5, queen d6, and now not the move bishop g5, which was actually played in a game Vega versus Larino, which did eventually end in a win for white, so it's not a terrible path to go down. But apparently the move knight d2 should just be completely winning. Knight d2, bishop e7, knight e4, queen d7, and now bishop g5, castles, just bishop e7, knight e7, knight g5, and the position is apparently resignable. After bishop f5 to avoid mate, you would have bishop f7, king h8, bishop back to e6, queen e8, knight f7, and then we do this double check, we rip the queen, we rip the bishop, and we're simply up a piece. So the development lead is a huge thing. This little bit of extra space that black has on the d4 square is not as big of a deal as the development lead. So the more time that we spend not trying to catch up or not trying to strike back in the middle is more time for black to get in trouble. So like another example is knight f6. We would play something like d3 and then say a passive move like d6. Now we could just simply play c3, and we're getting rid of this problem. And this is something that's kind of, I guess, a little difficult to understand. Like, a lot of people think that they have an advantage in this position because of black's doubled pawns, when in reality, the doubled pawns are actually hurting you a little bit more than they're helping you if you're playing the white pieces, because this pawn on d4 is actually hindering your position. It's preventing you from developing naturally. And that's what black is banking on to catch up in development. So when you play a move like c3 and offer to undouble his pawns, what you're basically saying is, I am going to let you get rid of your problem, but I'm also getting rid of my problem, which is the fact that my development was being hindered. And after dc3, knight c3, it's now very, very clear that white has an advantage because, again, white is up these 2 tempo, and now white has more space in the middle of the board. So it should be very clear that white is slightly better here after dc3, knight c3. And that's basically the plan that white is going to follow if black plays very passively or very slowly, is white is just going to play something like d3 and then c3. And then after c3, we're going to be able to exchange in the middle of the board, and everything should be fine. So, generally speaking, black should strike back in the middle quickly. So, the game we're following here is actually Kasparov versus Khalifman that was played in Rapid in Moscow back in 2002. And Kasparov was playing the white pieces. This game continued e takes d5, c takes d5, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, rook e1 check, again just taking advantage of those tempos, knight e7, and then c4, which is apparently an incredible move, although there were other moves that were possible. I think even knight a3, just developing the knight and holding the bishop on b5 was also possible. But this move was really good. So c4, and then we have a6, and bishop d7, queen d7, d3, and Kasparov just started taking advantage of the fact that it's very difficult for black to get his king to where he really needs to, which is the king side. This knight is pinned, it can't move, it's difficult to develop the remaining king side. So it seems like black is going to have to stay on the queen side, but if he stays over there, white has a pawn majority over here, and it's going to be easy for white to draw up an attack on the queen side, which is exactly what happened. Black castled queen side, actually, and then we have this knight d2, king b8, b4, just advancing his queenside pawns, just going after the queenside, dc4, and then dc4, just trying to push now this queenside pawn majority, just pawn storming the black king, basically. So we have knight to c6, b5, takes, knight to b4, knight to c4, queen f5, rook e5, and of course this is already just absolutely brilliant Kasparov chess, because this is what Kasparov does. Queen to c2, and bishop f4, and apparently that's it. The game is over. After bishop f4, the whole point is basically white has a mating attack, so after queen d1, rook d1, white tries to sidestep the mess, because there's all these discoveries with the rook, and the bishop is on this diagonal, same diagonal as the king. He tries to sidestep everything with king e8, but unfortunately after pawn to a3, pawn to f6, white just ignores the attack on his rook and just takes the knight to open the a file, and black had to resign. The point being that if you take the rook on e5, you're running into rook e1 check, king b8, bishop e5 check, and now you can either throw a bishop in the way and let it get captured and end up with a completely lost position. For example, after king c7, rook c1, king over, takes, rook blocks, check, and then we rip the rook, and we're just up a whole piece with an extra pawn, which is passed on the b4 square. So, for example, just something easy to consolidate should just be decisive advantage white, no problems. But the other option, which actually looks like the one that most people would take here, is instead of sacrificing that large amount of material back, would be to try to run away with a move like king to c8, but unfortunately that walks into, and pause the video and see if you can find it, that walks into knight b6 checkmate. So that's kind of a big problem in this position. So, all told, how are we supposed to meet the bird defense with white? Well, in short, after they play knight d4, you're supposed to take it. And then keep in mind that this doubled pawn here is not a disadvantage for black. In reality, at some point, you're going to want to play c3 and get rid of this doubled pawn so that you can complete your development quickly, because it is actually hindering your development. But the disadvantage, of course, of black playing knight c6 to d4 without hitting anything on the c3 square is that he's down 2 clean tempo, and he's not going to have a good way to get those tempo back. So all you need to do is castle, and then after, say, c6, bishop c4, If he does nothing, you're intending something like d3 and c3 to simply break up the middle of the board and keep your development lead. If he strikes back in the middle of the board, you're intending to take advantage of your development lead by checking his king while his king is still in the middle. And you should have some sort of advantage here. Just kind of follow this Kasparov versus Khalifman game played in Moscow back in 2002. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.